What happens when a razor-sharp talk show host attempts to undermine a formidable entrepreneur on live television? Aaliyah Brooks' rebuttal left the audience utterly stunned. Aaliyah Brooks wasn't your typical business magnate. At just 29 years old, she had built a prosperous enterprise from scratch, an enterprise that not only fueled her own success but also transformed the lives of countless immigrant women. Born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, Aaliyah believed her achievements were only meaningful if they opened doors for others. Her latest groundbreaking project aimed to empower immigrant women with access to cutting-edge technology and entrepreneurial training. So when she received an invitation to appear on The Morning Spotlight, one of the nation's most watched talk shows, she was exhilarated. It was her chance to highlight the inspiring stories of those her program was assisting and to prove that determination, talent, and community support could overcome any obstacle. The host, Violet Lancaster, was infamous for her biting remarks and flair for igniting controversy. Equally revered and reviled, Violet was notorious for her polarizing on-air presence. Yet, Aaliyah had weathered far greater storms than a combative interviewer. This was her moment, and she intended to seize it. On the day of the broadcast, Aaliyah arrived at the Los Angeles studio wearing a dazzling electric blue suit that mirrored her vibrant energy. The makeup artist complimented her on her radiant appearance, bolstering her confidence even as nerves simmered beneath her calm exterior. The studio buzzed with production staff, cameras, and the low hum of an expectant audience. Seated in her customary spot, Violet flashed Aaliyah a wide, calculated grin that betrayed no warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aaliyah Brooks, the self-made entrepreneur rewriting the rules of business," Violet announced amid rapt applause. Aaliyah leaned into the introduction, offering a warm, assured smile. "Thank you, Violet. I'm delighted to share the journey behind our mission to empower immigrant women through technology," she declared. The initial minutes unfolded smoothly as Aaliyah recounted her evolution from a determined teenager to the leader of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Violet nodded intermittently, interjecting with seemingly innocuous questions. Yet, a subtle shift in Violet's tone hinted at a brewing storm, as the interview prepared to take a dramatic, unexpected turn. With tension electrifying the air, the clash of ideologies promised to redefine televised discourse. In that charged moment, every viewer sensed history being made, as Aaliyah's unwavering conviction shattered barriers and silenced dissent, leaving an indelible mark on hearts and minds alike, truly unforgettable and transformative. Building on the fervor from Aaliyah's stirring introduction, the conversation swiftly shifted to her community-focused initiative. Initially, compliments had been warm, yet as the discussion deepened, they turned edged with subtle derision. Seizing the moment, Violet Lancaster tilted her head in her signature, exaggeratedly curious manner, and with feigned concern she asked, "Aaliyah, do you truly believe programs like yours are needed simply because people aren't pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps?" The studio air grew thick with tension as Violet's question resonated across the set. Aaliyah's calm remained unshaken. She paused, drawing a measured breath before replying. "Violet," she began, her voice firm and resolute, "this isn't about a lack of hard work. It's about recognizing systemic barriers that hinder so many, and about forging real pathways for them to thrive." Her words, delivered with unwavering clarity, received polite applause from part of the audience, though Violet's smile deepened into a more conniving grin, as if she had long awaited this opening. Unbeknownst to Aaliyah, Violet was ready to press further. Leaning forward deliberately, her fingers drummed on the glossy table, and she remarked in a tone that wavered between rehearsed and insincere, "But don't you think focusing on systemic barriers can sometimes serve as an excuse? After all, isn't the American dream all about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience, some applauded, while others shifted uncomfortably. Aaliyah noted the mixed reactions, a few furrowed brows among the crowd, but maintained her poise, having faced similar rhetoric in boardrooms and family debates. A determined smile touched her lips as she retorted, "The American dream, in its purest form, is indeed inspiring. Yet it ignores the uneven hurdles life places before different people. Boots are only as effective as their laces, what happens when those laces are missing or stolen before one even gets a chance to wear them? At that, laughter and applause erupted from part of the audience. Aaliyah continued steadily, my initiative restores those missing laces, not by tying shoes for anyone, but by ensuring everyone has the essential tools to take that crucial first step. Violet's eyes flickered with brief uncertainty as she glanced at the production crew, silently planning her next move. Still, she managed to quip in a syrupy tone with a cutting edge, that's a clever analogy. The tension in the room was palpable as both women stood at a crossroads of ideology and ambition, all eyes watched, aware that this fiery exchange was reshaping the narrative of empowerment and challenging entrenched misconceptions about hard work and opportunity. Building on the explosive exchange from earlier, where Aaliyah restored missing laces and shattered preconceptions, the conversation now veered into even more contentious territory. Violet Lancaster interjected with a provocative challenge. Some might argue that fixating on race and inequality only fuels division. Shouldn't we instead concentrate on unity rather than emphasizing our differences? The question hung in the air, charged with drama as the audience leaned forward in anticipation. Aaliyah tilted her head thoughtfully, her eyes reflecting a measured resolve as she prepared to answer. Unity sounds wonderful, she began deliberately, but one cannot build a bridge without first acknowledging the river that separates us. Ignoring differences does not erase them, it merely leaves people stranded on opposite shores. Her words, delivered with quiet intensity, sparked another wave of applause that grew louder than before. For a brief moment, Violet's carefully maintained facade flickered, betraying a hint of uncertainty. Yet, she swiftly regained her composure, her tone sharpening as she pressed on, that may be, but let's get specific. Your initiative targets young immigrant women exclusively. Why not extend it to everyone? Isn't that inherently exclusionary? A subtle twinge of irritation flashed across Aaliyah's face, though she remained outwardly calm. This line of questioning was not new to her, she had encountered it time and again from those unwilling to grasp the necessity of tailored support for marginalized communities. It is not exclusionary, Aaliyah explained steadily, her voice imbued with conviction. It is intentional. When you know where the gaps lie, you address them directly. If a house has a leaking roof, you repair the precise spot where the damage occurs, not the entire structure at once. My program targets a very specific need, and by doing so, we ultimately uplift entire communities. Her analogy resonated deeply, drawing another surge of applause that electrified the studio. But Violet was far from finished. Leaning back in her chair with arms crossed as if bracing for the next volley, she continued with a tone tinged with skepticism and feigned curiosity, I'm merely playing devil's advocate here, but isn't it true that such programs foster dependency rather than self-reliance? Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips, as she recognized Violet's tactic to provoke and unsettle the room. Even as the tension escalated toward a boiling point, Aaliyah's gaze remained locked on Violet, unwavering and sharp. Every word was a deliberate strike against outdated notions, and the atmosphere crackled with the promise of a decisive rebuttal. Refusing to let Violet dictate the narrative any longer, Aaliyah's calm voice rang out with a quiet yet unyielding strength as she addressed the escalating tension. Let me ask you this, Violet, when banks extend loans to help new businesses launch, are they fostering dependency, or are they offering essential resources to those determined to grow and succeed? Violet opened her mouth to reply, but Aaliyah pressed on. That is precisely what my initiative does, it is an investment in the future, providing young women with the means to stand on their own and create opportunities not only for themselves but for entire community. Ties. The issue is not dependency, it is the severe lack of opportunity. At these words, a resounding wave of applause broke out, more powerful and sustained than before, as even crew members nodded in silent agreement. Violet's meticulously crafted veneer began to show cracks, she shifted in her seat, crossing her legs defensively and tilting her head in a manner that was more guarded than curious. Very well, Aaliyah, Violet snapped, her tone now clipped and edged with strain. You make a persuasive argument, but surely you comprehend why some contend that programs with such narrow focus leave others feeling excluded. In this era, everyone clamors for inclusion, don't you agree? Aaliyah's smile wavered for a moment, not from frustration but from a steadfast resolve. Leaning forward, her hands clasped firmly, she responded, inclusion is vital, yet it does not mean ignoring the unique challenges faced by certain groups. Consider a child struggling in school, you wouldn't hold back the entire class to equalize performance. Instead, you offer that child the extra support needed to catch up, and in doing so, the entire class benefits. A heavy silence descended over the studio, laden with the weight of undeniable truth. But Violet was not finished. With a challenging smirk, she leaned back and retorted, an interesting perspective, Aaliyah. Yet, do you truly believe that focusing so intently on race does not inadvertently deepen division? Would it not be preferable to concentrate solely on what unites us? Before Aaliyah could answer, Violet continued, her voice laced with biting skepticism, some even argue that programs like yours amount to a form of segregation, isn't that ironic? At that, the audience gasped, as if struck by a sudden, electric current that left every listener poised on the edge of their seat. Silence reigned for a heartbeat before the atmosphere burst into fervent energy, every person in the studio realizing that this charged debate was rewriting the rules of empowerment, leaving an indelible mark. The audience reacted audibly, some shaking their heads in disbelief for the first time. A flicker of emotion crossed Aaliyah's face, a mixture of incredulity and exasperation, as she glanced at the crowd, drawing strength from their palpable support. Then, turning her full attention back to Violet, she spoke slowly and deliberately, her voice heavy with personal conviction. What's truly ironic, she began, is how people twist the concept of equity into something it is not. Violet, segregation is about exclusion, about denying people the very access they deserve. What I am doing is the complete opposite, I am opening doors that have been slammed shut for generations. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, before continuing with fiery passion, and you know what's even more ironic? When people like me try to repair the damage inflicted by those systemic injustices, we are immediately labeled as divisive. But let's be clear, we cannot fix a problem if we refuse to acknowledge that it exists. At this, thunderous applause erupted from the audience, with many rising to their feet in support. Violet's composed facade faltered for a split second, and she hastily regained her composure, plastering a strained smile on her face. Yet, just when it appeared that Aaliyah had delivered the final, crushing blow, Violet escalated the tension further. Leaning back in her chair, her eyes flashed with frustration, as if she had underestimated Aaliyah's resolve all along. The energy in the room shifted palpably, and for a moment it was evident that Violet was scrambling to reassert control over the narrative. In a smooth but razor-sharp tone, she challenged, you seem to have an answer for everything. But let's be real for a moment, there are hard-working, struggling people out there who might look at what you're doing and ask, what about us? How do you justify leaving us behind? How is that fair? Aaliyah blinked, not out of surprise at the question, but at its blatant attempt to paint her as the villain. Her jaw tightened ever so slightly, a detail not missed by anyone watching closely, before her expression softened into one of calm determination. Leaning forward with resolve, her voice resonated clearly as she repeated, fair, with deliberate, quiet power. Violet, please let me ask you this, she continued, her eyes locking onto Violet's with unwavering focus, when a firefighter rushes into a burning building, do we accuse them of being unfair to the houses that remain untouched by flames, or do we applaud their courage? The studio fell silent, every listener absorbed by the intensity of her words, as the debate reached a fevered pitch that promised to reshape the very discourse on equity and opportunity. Do we thank them for protecting the neighborhood? Aaliyah's words echoed through the studio, and suddenly, a profound silence fell, not the awkward kind of silence that makes one squirm, but a silence that drew every listener to the very edge of their seats. Even the production crew, normally bustling behind the cameras, halted their activities, every eye was fixed on Aaliyah, absorbing the passion in her plea. "This is exactly what my initiative is about," she declared, her voice unwavering and resolute. "It's about extinguishing fires by addressing the unique needs of people who have been ignored, overlooked, and underserved for far too long." She pressed on, her tone growing even more fervent. "When we lift these individuals up and give them a real chance to thrive, we are not taking anything away from anyone. Instead, we are enriching the entire community." At that moment, Violet attempted to interject, her mouth opening to counter, but Aaliyah raised her hand, not rudely, but with a firm insistence that brooked no interruption. "And let's not pretend," she added, her voice laden with the weight of years of hard-won experience, "that these debates over fairness are ever truly about fairness. When we speak of fairness, what we are really discussing is comfort. Whose comfort are we safeguarding? And whose discomfort are we choosing to ignore?" A heavy pause followed, laden with unspoken truths, before the studio erupted into deafening applause, cheers, and even standing ovations. Aaliyah reclined slightly in her chair, her external composure intact while her eyes blazed with an unyielding fire. She had spoken her truth, and it resonated powerfully with every soul present. Meanwhile, Violet's carefully maintained facade began to crumble. She fumbled with her water glass, taking a hasty sip before forcing a strained laugh. "Well, Aaliyah," she managed in a voice that was thin and strained, "you are undeniably passionate. I see why your program has such fervent supporters. But let me ask you." Before Violet could finish, Aaliyah cut her off politely yet firmly, leaning forward. The shift in energy was palpable as the audience leaned in. "When you hear tales of people supposedly pulling themselves up by their bootstraps," she challenged, "do you ever stop to consider who manufactured those boots in the first place? And who decided which boots were even worthy of investment?" Violet froze. This question was not merely rhetorical, it was a precise strike aimed at the heart of her argument. The audience fell silent once more, awaiting an answer that Violet clearly did not have, as Aaliyah's words continued to reshape the narrative of equity and opportunity. Her challenge left the room utterly transformed. An electric silence hung in the studio as Aaliyah's challenge to Violet reverberated through the room. What happened next made it clear that this moment would be remembered far beyond the confines of this single interview, lingering in memory for what felt like a lifetime. Violet sat there, her normally sharp tongue utterly mute, her practiced composure faltered as her mouth opened slightly, but no words emerged. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing every nuance of the awkward pause, while Aaliyah remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression the very picture of grace under fire. The atmosphere was charged, with whispers and murmurs buzzing through the crowd like static before someone finally shouted, "Say it louder." The room then erupted into a mix of laughter and applause. Aaliyah smiled warmly, fully seizing the moment as if it were her own. In that charged silence, Violet finally managed to stammer out a response. "Well, Aaliyah, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on some points," she managed, her voice tight, her usual confidence replaced by strained civility. "But I do appreciate your perspective." Aaliyah, never missing a beat, replied with measured politeness and unwavering firmness, "And I appreciate the opportunity to share it." Her words were a masterclass in grace under pressure. As the producers cut to a commercial break, the damage was already done. The live audience was abuzz, their fervent reactions spilling onto social media before the cameras stopped rolling. Hashtags like Aaliyah Brooks and Morning Spotlight began trending within minutes, as clips of her sharp retorts were shared across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. One tweet proclaimed, "She said what needed to be said," racking up thousands of likes, while another clip captioned, "Extinguishing fires, not ignoring them," was quickly reposted by influencers, activists, and some celebrities. Backstage, in the sanctuary of her dressing room, Aaliyah sat down to catch her breath. Her phone buzzed with notifications, texts from friends, emails from supporters, and tags from strangers praising her eloquence and courage. As she scrolled through the messages, her heart swelled with gratitude for the young woman thanking her for her words. Detractors accused her of divisiveness and aggression, but she knew these criticisms were not about her tone, they were about her refusal to shrink for others' comfort. Later that evening, as she overlooked downtown Los Angeles, Aaliyah reflected on a day that had been as challenging as it was triumphant, aware that she had ignited a spark that would endure. That experience was not only a personal triumph but an opportunity to speak truth to power. As Aaliyah reflected on the day, she thought of the young women her program supported, girls who might one day watch this interview and see a reflection of themselves in her strength, resilience, and unapologetic authenticity. She knew her courage had the power to inspire and ignite hope in hearts long silenced by doubt. In the quiet aftermath, while echoes of the debate still rang in her ears, her mind turned to the future. She imagined these young women realizing that someone was fighting for them, carving out space in a world too often determined to shut them out. That, to Aaliyah, was the true victory. Just then, a soft knock at the door snapped her back to reality. Her assistant appeared, beaming, "You're everywhere right now. CNN has picked up the story, they're calling it one of the most powerful live TV moments of the year." Aaliyah's smile was gentle as she shook her head. "It's not about me," she murmured quietly, "it's about the message." Her assistant nodded excitedly while holding up her phone. "Look, Beyoncé just shared the clip." Laughter broke from Aaliyah as the weight of the day lifted slightly. "I guess I can't argue with Queen Bey," she chuckled. The buzz from the interview did not fade. For weeks, news outlets dissected that moment, think pieces debated its impact, and social media amplified her words. Yet for Aaliyah, it was never about the headlines or the viral clips. It was about the young women who now knew that someone was fighting for them and making space for their voices to be heard. As dawn broke the next morning, her phone buzzed relentlessly, each notification another story, another chance for her words to resonate further than she ever imagined. Determined, her mind raced with ideas to use this momentum to advance her mission. By noon, she was back in her hometown, greeted by a group of eager young women waiting at the community center. One of them, a 19-year-old with tears in her eyes, approached Aaliyah and whispered, "Miss Aaliyah, I watched your interview last night, and you made me believe I can do anything." Her heart swelled as she placed a comforting hand on the young woman's shoulder and replied, "You already possess that power." Later that day, addressing a small group of participants, she affirmed, "All I'm doing is giving you the tools to recognize and unleash your inner strength." In that moment, Aaliyah realized that the true measure of victory was not in viral clips or trending hashtags, but in the hope and empowerment blossoming in every heart she touched. In her program, as she gathered the eager young women in the community center, Aaliyah shared her story of the live talk show with unyielding passion and profound wisdom. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice steady yet brimming with intensity, "the world isn't always going to hand you respect or fairness. Sometimes, you must demand it, sometimes, you must fight for it." She paused, her eyes scanning the room filled with determined faces, each one hungry for hope. "And when that moment arrives, remember this, your story, your voice, and your worth are never up for debate," she declared with unwavering conviction. The room fell into a deep, resonant silence, a silence not of awkwardness, but of understanding and a shared resolve to make a change. Aaliyah saw in every gaze the spark of rebellion and the promise of a brighter future. These young women were ready to challenge the status quo, to take on a world that had long ignored them. In that charged moment, she felt the truth of her mission, the work she was doing mattered, not just to her, but to every person longing for justice and equality. After the session, as twilight descended and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet, Aaliyah stepped out of the community center into the cool evening air. The sun's final rays cast long, dramatic shadows on the pavement, and she paused to reflect on her own arduous journey. The road had been steep and filled with obstacles, moments of doubt, setbacks, and battles that tested her spirit. Yet through every hardship, she had remained steadfast in her purpose, to ignite change, to inspire others, and to leave the world a little better than she found it. Aaliyah's story is a timeless reminder that standing up for what you believe in is rarely comfortable but always essential. Whether you are speaking on a grand stage or making small, meaningful changes in your own neighborhood, remember that your voice has the power to spark transformation. Do not allow the fear of discomfort or the sting of criticism to silence your truth. I urge you today to look within and consider how you can make a difference. Mentor someone in need, initiate a project that addresses a community challenge, or simply stand up for what is right. Every action you take, no matter how small, can create ripples of change. Embrace your struggles, transform them into strength, and remember that you hold the power to change the narrative. Together, we can build communities that celebrate every individual's worth and ignite a movement for lasting, positive change. Embrace your voice, fight for your truth, and let your courage light the way for others. Now, as you walk your own path, remember Aaliyah's journey and let her story inspire you. Life may challenge you, but every obstacle is an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to transform adversity into a catalyst for change. Let your passion guide you, and never allow fear to hold you back. Your voice matters, your story matters, and together we can create the world we dream of. So stand tall, be bold, and let your light shine bright.